The simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true. What does this mean? What is Baudrillard trying to say here? Let's take one of his examples. He uses many examples. For example, Disneyland is the best example. Disneyland is a simulacrum which is trying to hide the fact that there is nothing. But what is nothing? What isn't there? What is Baudrillard trying to say? It's very simple. Disneyland is trying to hide the fact that there is no reality behind it. It's the same with, he gives the example of Watergate. Why is Watergate there? Watergate's there to try to hide that there is no scandal at all. It's just a gigantic play, a simulacrum. What about the Borg's fable that follows? Basically in the fable, as it is written in the book, there is an empire in which the cartographers have become so sophisticated in their methods that they manage to make a map that covers the territory exactly. But as Baudrillard says, the fable doesn't come full circle. It's the same thing as with the example of the matrix I used in the previous video. There is no longer any way to distinguish between the real and the false. They have merged, they have become something paradoxical, they have become what Baudrillard calls the hyper-real, which is, as he writes, it is the generation by models of a real without origin or reality, a hyper-real. Just as religious statues try to hide the fact that there is actually no God, Watergate's tried to dissimulate the fact that there is actually no morality at all. Watergate's basically there to try to convince us that there is a system of justice and it catches the bad guys, blah blah, but it's actually not true. Watergate's just trying to suppress the fact that everything has been surrendered basically to capitalism. Leftist thinkers try to, as Baudrillard says, hold out the mirror of equivalence to capital, hoping it will comply with this phantasmagoria of the social contract. But the thing with capitalism is, it doesn't play by rules. It doesn't give a shit about anything. It just tries to uphold this status quo we've basically been caught in for decades. The only weapon of power, its only strategy against this defection, is to re-inject the real and the referential everywhere, to persuade us of the reality of the social, of the gravity of the economy and the finalities of production. To this end, it prefers the discourse of crisis, but also, why not, that of desire. Take your desires for reality can be understood as the ultimate slogan of power, since in a non-referential world, even the confusion of the reality principle and the principle of desire is less dangerous than contagious hyperreality. So basically, as the capitalist order becomes all-pervasive throughout our lives, those in power try to desperately convince us they're still in power, but there is no principle, no reality principle anymore, so it becomes increasingly harder for them to convince us of this. So they use the scandals and the crises to try to prove there is, for example, morality, or there is an economy to be saved, but they're no longer there. This logic applies not only to the government, who uses the discourse of crisis, but also of, for example, conspiracy theorists, who apply the discourse of crisis, which is actually the discourse of power, basically, to convince us that the world is ending in 2012, we are all going to die. And this basically leads us to Zizek, who claims that it has become easier for people to imagine the end of the world than it is for them to imagine the end of the capitalist order. So why is this chapter called Precession of Simulacra? Basically, the model precedes the reality. So we're all caught up in observing models rather than actually experiencing the real. Now, to remain in the political and the conspiracy theory kind of stuff, for example, 9/11. We're all concerned not with the real 9/11. We're actually concerned with its model. When 9/11 happened, it was filmed from so many vantage points that basically we've all been confronted with the model of 9/11 happening on television. This in turn has led to this bizarre thing where the truth is impossible to discover because it's been filmed so many times, which is very paradoxical because you would think that filming the real event would expose the truth, but nothing is further from the truth. Perhaps here we could establish a link to Lacanian psychoanalysis, which might be interesting. As the model of 9/11 has become so prominent over its pure raw reality, we could say that just as in Lacanian psychoanalysis, the real is so far away from us that we cannot directly experience it anymore except through some filters and models. 9/11 and any event basically is impossible to really capture as it really is. Now, as the World Trade Center collapse was filmed from so many points, there are now so many different interpretations as to what happens that there is an overproduction of interpretation, just as there is an overproduction of the material. When the real is no longer what it was, nostalgia assumes its full meaning. There is a plethora of myths of origin and of signs of reality, a plethora of truth, of secondary objectivity, of authenticity. As for Lacan, the only way to experience the real is through the imaginary or the symbolic. For Baudrillard, it is always a question of proving the real through the imaginary, proving truth through scandal, proving the law through transgression, proving work through striking, proving the system through crisis, and capital through revolution. Everything is metamorphosed into its opposite to perpetuate itself in its expurgated form. Here we move to give an example to the difference between the social and communication. Now, when one is socializing, one is basically interacting with a human being, face to face. With communication, this is no longer necessary. You can call, chat, YouTube. This leads to the disappearance of the social, because through the precession of the models, communication, which is the model of socialization, becomes more prominent and overgrows the social as the main means of socialization. This leads basically to isolation of human beings, which is at face value hard to understand, because there is today so many means to reach other humans, but the problem is we can only reach them through inhuman communication. To remain in this train of thought, Baudrillard writes, "This is why nuclear proliferation does not increase the risk of either an atomic clash or an accident. The very possibility of paralyzing a whole country by flicking a switch makes it so that the electrical engineers will never use this weapon. The whole myth of the total and revolutionary strike crumbles at the very moment when the means are available. But alas, precisely because those means are available, therein lies the whole process of deterrence.